Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the podcast, I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to Zoho, and particularly the team at Zoho Desk for sponsoring the podcast this month. Zoho Desk is trusted by over 50,000 businesses around the world to elevate their customer service. And the team over there recently asked me to write a white paper for them that explores how focusing on employee happiness and customer success can drive business results. The white paper is called The Killer Combination: Customer Success, Happiness, and the Right Technology. Now do check it out by following the links in the show notes because I think you're really going to like it. So, shall we get into the interview? So, welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Josh Feast, who's the CEO and co-founder of Cogito. He's also a returnee from way back when to the podcast. And we wanted to pick up and see where Josh and Cogito have gotten to. But first of all, Josh, hello, welcome back, he says in parentheses on an audio recording, to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a real pleasure to be back chatting, Adrian.
Excellent. So Josh, for people that haven't delved deep into the archives or haven't been following us for however many years, I must say at the time of recording, this podcast will be, had various names, but it will be 12 years old in January. What? And so for the listeners who are not familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Absolutely. So Cogito's mission is to support the front line inside large organizations in order for consumers to get consistently positive experiences when they interact. Our thesis as a company has always been that big organizations have these large human machine systems, such as contact centers with sometimes tens of thousands of agents taking 20, 30 calls a day each. And that in those big human machine systems, there's something missing, which is really information about the human experience. And without that information, it's really hard to succeed at the objective of those organizations, which is to provide great experiences. And so this is when I say that, I'm talking about information that helps you understand things like empathy and guides people towards a stronger emotional connection when they interact. And so after, I guess, now 15 years of basic science, applied R&D, initial focus on healthcare, and now a broader focus across lots of different industries on the front line, what we've figured out and proven is that if you can provide real-time in-the-moment feedback to these large teams that focuses in particular on the human dimension, you'll get more efficient, more effective customer interactions and much better customer experiences. And that's what we do and live and breathe.
Awesome. Now, I alluded to this earlier. I mean, I know that I looked it up actually. We first spoke on the podcast back in, I think it came out in February, but I think we might have spoken in the January of 2007. I mean, that's
17.
Nearly 5.5 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, it's like crumbs. It's crazy. But the thing that within all of that, I've had the privilege of talking to various kind of like new tech companies, yourselves included, along the way, and it's what I've seen over the course of those years is like how many have not necessarily stayed the course. Some have actually just been too early for the market. I mean, you guys are doing real time feedback. In the moment feedback years ago. And now that's becoming a thing, right? It's becoming a big thing. And everybody's going like, oh, we've done feedback or we've done analytics things, and it's all been kind of like historical kind of like stuff. But now everybody's kind of moving into the sort of the real-time stuff. But back then you were relatively early on your journey, and so am I right saying possibly a little bit early for the market? Maybe. So a question I wanted to ask you is like, so how have the last 5 years been? And what's changed for Cogito with respect to the kind of the market and so on and so forth?
Yeah, timing markets is very challenging. And yes, arguably, yes, we were, let's charitably call it pioneering. Yeah, so if you go back 5 years, we really had to do a lot at that time, a lot of like education and validation of some like now incredibly basic assumptions. So does real-time guidance while you're speaking to somebody help or hinder?
Mm-hmm.
Does emotional intelligence data actually add value? And in what circumstances? And even back then, it was even more broad than that. It was like, is artificial intelligence a good technology? Like there were some really like basic questions 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And at that time, so we were working with some real pioneers, right? We were working with some real pioneers in healthcare and insurance, particularly, who were just passionate about patient and member experiences and willing to take a leap of faith to test the ideas, right? These tested the ideas, and I'm talking about like visionaries like Mark Morse or Peter Wilson at Humana, or Chris Smith at MetLife. These are just like, when you look back, the incredible executives to take a leap of faith in some of these ideas, but they got the success from it, right? And so where we're at now, so if we like sort of fast forward, the 5 years, so I think you're absolutely right. So where we're at now is that real-time guidance, which is sometimes called real-time agent assist, is coming close to being a must-have for a modern CX organization. Close to, just close there. And what that means is it's proven across almost every industry, obviously healthcare and insurance where we started, but also now financial services, tech, telco, hospitality, just about you name it. And there's that validation. And then what you're seeing now is those visionary executives, because there's still lots of visionary executives, but what they're doing now is they're taking the next leap, which is deploying the technology fast and at massive scale to get the big benefits for their organizations and customers. So that's like, I think, one of the big kind of sea changes. If I, said where we're still working in the field, is there's still more education and demonstration to be done, right? So what we say now is, it's not necessarily enough to guide people on what they say in the moment, which I see is what people still focus a lot on. And I still haven't completely moved everybody on this point. And what you really need to do, in our opinion, is combine and guide on what to say and how you say it. And it's just because of a simple, basic fact. People make decisions about whether they've been well served by the way they're spoken to. It's just true. And you kind of got it, and you've got to get that right as well. And so that's, I think, something that we're still working on, making sure is widely understood. And I think there's also a need to, is on more on the technical side, to educate on the difference between what's now, I think, referred to as true real time and near real time. So people have sort of gone from in-call, post-call to like true real time, near real time. And true real time is really important, particularly if you're guiding people on how to speak, because it just that instant feedback is so important. I think as well, like we're really starting the education process to help people see also the real importance of a closed loop system in general. That's very dynamic in terms of being able to provide different types of guidance to different agents, groups of agents, lines of business, so you can dynamically respond to changes in your environment. Okay. So that's another sort of new thing for us, where we're kind of out there, doing the good work of saying, hey, here's the next thing.
I mean, I think it's also important to kind of to point out is that because a lot of people in the sort of the real-time guidance space will be operating on a kind of a language analytics kind of model, like almost like a speech to text kind of model, like an NLP or NLU type of approach, and applying. And the reason why it's moved into the, if you like, the front office from the back office and into sort of real time or near real time is because they've been able to, the power of models and computing power and things is accelerated, and they've been able to reduce the latency that you end up then you can show up in real time or near real time, as it were. But it's important to point out is that you're just not doing that, and that you're doing something kind of different. I just, this is a bit of a kind of blast from the past. We should actually make people aware that you're not just pioneering in terms of around doing something that everybody else wanted to do, kind of like way in front of them. You're doing something that everybody else wanted to do, but doing something a completely different way. And it's around this kind of conversational intelligence, but from a completely different perspective. And that's where you, as part of your history and where you've come from with the work with Sandy Pentland and social physics and all that type of stuff. So can you give us a little bit of a key kind of like insight on that to just help people understand the difference? This is not the same as everybody else. It's actually very, very different, but it's still in that sort of that real-time space.
Yeah, absolutely right. So our foundation, we were originally 10 years of basic science at MIT, which was led by my co-founder, Professor Sandy Pentland. And it was really looking at how you can understand people from the way they speak and move and interact, right? And that because we have evolved basically multiple communication mechanisms, when we converse with each other, we send information encoded in the words we use. We also send information that's designed to improve our connection with each other by exchanging information about essentially our psychological state. And this is what we do as humans, and it's how we get people excited and how we show that we're confident or how we show that we're distressed or various other things. And it's an incredibly important part of how we communicate. Some would say it's the larger part of how we communicate. And there's easy ways to prove that, because you can look at things like analyzing how people speak in business plan pitches or things, and decisions are made based on how people speak much more than what they say. So it's sort of a known sort of phenomenon and so Cogito's like original start was to say, okay, this is an important source of data, this information that we're all sending to each other. How can we understand it? How can it be useful? And where that's evolved now is that when we deliver large-scale AI systems for the contact center, we do really two things seamlessly and bring them together. And that the simple way is what you say and how you say it. But really what you're doing is we're listening not only to the words and understanding the words, but we're listening continuously to the underlying behavioral signals inside that conversation, with the goal of improving and supporting the agent to deliver better experiences for the customers. And that takes the form of helping if an agent, for example, is tired or distressed or distracted, because these are challenging jobs, as you well know, and I'm sure it's been noted several times over the last years about how challenging the work can be. You can essentially become almost like socially deaf, right? Even though you want desperately to provide a great experience, but you just can't hear that somebody's distressed, or you don't realize that you're coming across because you're tired, flat or not engaging, or and somebody could have a negative impression of that. Oh, you don't care about me. You're not listening to me. And then the customer can they can react poorly. So what the tool does is it works on both levels, so that so it almost feels to the customer as if it's a fresh call.
Right.
And the fresh call, somebody's listening, they're engaging, they care about them. Even on the other hand, this is the 20th call with the same subject of the day for their agent, and they're tired, but they can still come across in this kind of really kind of optimal manner. So that's what we focus on, and that ability to do that, which requires really true real time plus signals analysis, as well as kind of NLU, and combining them together is one of the distinctive things that we do.
Awesome. And because we were talking about kind of like the shift in the market, and people have started to there's more and more people start talking about the kind of the real time and near real time sort of like space. And I noticed that you kind of made an announcement, and this is one of the kind of, I feel like the instigations of the call. It's almost a bit like there's a big announcement a couple of months ago or something. It's like, it felt like we've arrived. We sort of felt like there's an announcement around it said you've successfully deployed your emotion and conversation AI platform to a Fortune 25 customer, but it not just to the customer, but like as a customer, it's like, oh, that's fine, kind of brand, but it's like to their 30,000 plus agent workforce. I'm like, what? I mean, like that's a lot of seats, man. So that, I mean, and it's also apparently you said it was like the largest deployment of its kind in the contact center kind of industry. But then it's just like, drop the mic, forget the scale conversation. We've done that now. And I just wanted to go, Crumbs, first of all, congratulations. You have arrived.
Thank you.
It's possibly taken a while, kind of like feel like you could be slogging through kind of mud for kind of a while, but like, wow. And secondly, how did that all come about? I mean, is that another visionary executive that's just gone, I want that and I want that kind of like everywhere? How did it come about?
Well, yeah, no, thank you, and we are super proud of this. And I think it is. It's hard to completely know, but I believe it's the largest. I actually think it might be the largest by an order of magnitude. So I think it's like really a lot bigger I mean, we also have a number of other really large ones, but we're very, very proud of this. So I think, like you would expect, getting up to this type of scale with a new concept of technology does take a long time and a lot of mutual trust built up, right? And so we were working with our customer for several years to get to this point. It absolutely required a visionary, an operational visionary, and in this case, it's not just the visionary to test it, prove that it has value for the organization, but then convince the organization with data to go big, right?
Right.
So there's like really a number of steps. So again, like and I know you have you Punk Excel for exactly this reason, right? That this leadership is so critical in the industry to make real change happen. So for us, I was thinking of like there's an operationalization maturity curve that we kind of go through together, right? So there's steps to create a seamless agent experience, to adapt process, to take advantage of the capabilities. But look, I think through being careful, through being fortunate, the good news is the results have been excellent. So we're getting efficiency improvement, or our customers getting efficiency improvement, effectiveness improvements, experience improvements across the board, much faster time to proficiency for new agents, thanks to the guidance. And then I think a much broader and more nuanced understanding of customer experience, because there's just this human data now. So you can know that in this pocket of your operation, things aren't going as well as you hoped, and do something about it, right? Which is just, otherwise it's just hard to know.
Excellent. Now I know that because they're, Fortune 25, so there's only 25 of them. So, you've got to make a guess. You're going to be the odds are like you're 4% likely to be right. But you can't name them, and that's that's understood. But what I wanted to kind of ask you about was to sort of do you have other examples of other brands, organizations that you're working with that you can kind of talk to me about in more detail about what they're doing, how they're benefiting, with working with yourself and your technology, just to kind of to reprise the kind of benefits that you can do, because I think we all know that over the last couple of years, the requirement for support, it just seems to have just shifted up. I mean, it shifted up when the pandemic was on and everything kind of went, everything that could went remote. But that sort of shifted support, service kind of volumes up over all sorts of kind of live kind of channels. And yet, those, even though we've sort of passed the rump of the pandemic, as it were, support and service volumes are remaining persistently high across the piece, and so there's a lot of pressure on agents, and I'm really interested in that sort of agent experience, and particularly this idea that I've been talking about for a wee while now is like, how do we operationalize excellence in the moment? Which sort of speaks exactly to your kind of point, because I remember back when we were talking about, you were talking about the original kind of messaging, as it were, was about how do you improve difficult conversations, or how do you make difficult conversations less difficult? And so I'm going to stop talking now and then ask you, have you got a couple of short stories that you can share with us to tell us a bit more detail about what you do, how you do it, and kind of who you're working with, and kind of what sort of benefits they've derived from that to sort of bring the whole thing to life?
Yeah, very happy to. So I'll one organization that's public, it's new for us, which I'm pleased to highlight, would be Wyndham Hotels. So Scott Strickland is the executive leader and the driving force behind our work together. So Wyndham Hotels, like all our customers, is passionate about providing excellent experience and deploying the best technology to achieve it, and to provide standardized technology as well. So they're very much about having platforms that they can use, because that organization has been growing, and they want to be able to scale really, really well and scale that. So one of the things that's great about them, from my perspective, one of the challenges that they have, which I think is just like, a lot of these are challenges of complexity. And one of the things that's fascinating about their complexity is that they service a huge number of brands.
Right.
So they have really, it's not just Wyndham Hotels. There's, I actually don't know how many, but there's really a lot. You can see it on the website.
Right. Okay.
And so what that means is that you're trying to provide excellent service across all these different brands, hospitality brands, and you're also trying to support both the hotel staff and hotel administrators as well as the guests.
Right.
So there's this, just the complexity of what they're trying to do is, I think, amazing. And so, the values or the KPIs or KPI improvements tend to be fairly consistent, I think, across our customers. And they're the 3 E's primarily. It's efficiency, effectiveness, and experience improvements, right? Which is, and one of the things that's nice about guiding real-time guidance is you can improve all 3. It's not a trade-off.
Right.
Because often, traditionally the case, I can make things efficient, but I'm going to make my customers less happy with me. And here, because we're kind of improving both the experience in terms of how people speak, but also getting the content faster, you can achieve all 3. But I think the thing that's really interesting about the Wyndham case, which is, I think, potentially somewhat unique over time, will be the ability to provide differentiated guidance to all the different types of brands from a central location.
Right.
I mean, I think that's really, really cool, because then you can essentially have a brand promise, or that's maybe differentiated, but you're still doing that from as a scale provider. So I think it's new. It's an early deployment with them, but they're public about it, and I'm super excited.
Excellent. I mean, I'm assuming that you can take brand tone of voice guidelines and hard code that into sort of like a guidance kind of module for a particular kind of brand, and therefore, if you have an agent that might be operating across a set of brands, when something comes in, then the module will adapt and adjust depending on kind of which brand customer they're talking to.
Exactly. And one of the things that's
I should be on the team. I understand this stuff.
You should. And one of the things that we're super excited about, and this is sort of, so you should think, how do you get to scale, right? So one thing is you have to have a system that just functions on large scale calls, but you also have a system that has to deal with the inevitable complexity of running at large scale. So one of the things we do is we provide services, but also tools to enable the customers to both see what's going on and also dynamically adjust all this guidance across all these different types. So then this is really this thing where I think you can kind of have a sort of responsive organization, right? Rather than, and two months later, I'm going to discover I had a problem on a look back, and I'm going to make a change, which takes 2 months to implement, and I'm going to train everybody. This way you can be sort of much more in the moment, because it's, it's a dynamic world out there, right? So I think that's a cool, little evolution.
Is there any other examples you want to kind of share, or is that, do you think that's kind of sufficient?
I prepped that one.
You prepped that one. Fine. We'll keep that there then. And let me ask you about the next thing, because there was also another thing when we were talking. The thing that kind of there was a thing that you said, which I was like, what's that? That sounds like something I'd hear in some sort of I don't know, political noir kind of thriller drama type thing, where you started to talk about the value of a partial containment strategy. And I was like, what? That's like something straight off the TV. I'm like, so can you explain to me kind of what does that mean?
So,
and also, why is it important?
Yeah. So I think I guess a couple of things. So I like to divide the world. I like to think about service in 2 ways, right? There's self-service and service. They're not the same thing.
Sure.
Right? And I think people mix up self-service and service, right? So the way they sometimes think of self-service as being service, which is I think not precisely at least how I understand it. So for me, the big difference. So full containment is a term typically used to describe call deflection. So right. Rather than provide service, which I view as a human doing some work for you,
right.
Is you're essentially diverting to essentially self-service tools, automated self-service tools, which can be a fantastic idea and great for the consumer. So that's nothing negative, but that's generally the concept is offer the customer self-service tools through any sort of forum in order not to have to incur the cost potentially of providing it through humans. So that's full containment. So partial containment is something that has always been there, but I think latest technologies are doing a lot of positive here. Is you're really trying to increase the efficiency of the service experience. So that's a human-driven experience. Could be through chat, could be through phone. But really, what you're doing in the background is you're trying to make it as efficient as possible for the human providing the service to solve the problem or provide that service, right? So that could be, to give an example, it could be rather than the agent spending X seconds to hunt for a knowledge article about how to deal with a problem, that gets automatically served to them, right? Or so that's like a great like classic example. Another one might be rather than having the agents spend a lot of time writing call notes, we're going to automatically populate stuff. And this is like a real win-win, right? Because for the agent, it's less stressful, it's less work, and for the consumer, they're getting what they want faster, right? And they're saving their time as well. So I think it's all a real positive, and so that's what we mean by partial containment, and it's a real trend in the industry.
No, I think that makes sense, and it plays into that idea that I was talking about. That's how do you operationalize excellence in the moment, sort of idea is. But I think it's interesting because you can do all that sort of stuff around. You can have a knowledge-centered service, take a knowledge-centered service approach, and it could be an auto-suggest, auto kind of whatever it might be. And it might be rather than just like a deep thing that a lot of people some people rather are taking a more of a snippet approach in the kind of leading edge around kind of knowledge. So rather than going, I'm going to refer you to this article, I'm going to refer you to this bit because this is the kind of the essential kind of bit,
exactly.
Right?
The most relevant.
But that's the kind of that's fine. But then there's, I think, what's interesting about it, and I think what's interesting about what you guys are kind of doing in that sort of space is like it's not just about knowledge; it's also about the communication, as it were. So it's a bit like the kind of the thing when you're talking to somebody, and how do you know if you're really listening or not? And you go. When you're talking to somebody and you ask yourself the question and go, am I just waiting for them to finish so I can then tell them what I think? Because if you catch yourself doing that, then you know that you're not really listening because you've almost kind of like jumped to the kind of the solution. And there's a danger kind of when you do that you miss, to your point, all of the other sort of signals. I know I've had it when I've been speaking to my wife about some things, and she's like, talking about that. So, and I'm like going, I jump in and go, oh, you should think about doing that. She'd be like, shut up. I'm not talking. I just want you to listen. Right. And that's like for me, it happened a couple of times. And then I had to learn the lesson kind of, that actually sometimes you just have to listen and you actually just have to stop and properly clue in. And I think there's an art to that. And particularly if you think about the context of an agent who's taking multiple calls all of the time, that could be difficult. And actually sort of getting that kind of balance around the kind of the positive outcomes, but also kind of in the moment, sort of like provision of the right information in the right kind of context and also in the right way. And it's the way bit, I think, that's kind of important. Because that can drive a lot of about how we feel. I think that's a big part of that whole, as you say, partial containment strategy, which I'm not a fan of the term, but I know what you mean, if that makes sense.
Well, I think you're absolutely bang on with that. And it does take a while. This is sort of why we sort of see the deployment of these types of systems and increases speeds up time to proficiency, because it's a learning curve to realize that the right decision is to listen and that actually that's the most efficient thing to do. Here's an example that I think is like illustrative, which I think is fun on different things. So what is one of the most like time pressured experiences we all have? It's going to see our PCP, right? So you go see a PCP, like your primary care doctor, for a visit. At least 15 minutes max they get, right? They get 15 minutes to do a health checkup, to give you a thing, right? So if I go to my PCP, and some of these guys are so incredibly efficient, and the most experienced ones, I'm always astounded because I will go in, and what is the first thing they do? They say, how's it going? What do you want to tell me? And they stop. Right? And they've got 15 minutes, right? But they know that if they stop and let me say whatever's on my mind, then the whole thing will go a whole lot faster, right? But that's a maturity, right? It's a maturity, but that's completely true, because otherwise if they just jump into the exams and things, I'm going to be like, but I haven't heard about my ache and my pain, right? So like, I'm going to wait and I'm going to drag it out because I really want to talk about my ache and my pain, right? So I think it's a great example of like how listening drives efficiency, which I think you're absolutely bang on about.
I love that kind of, that's it. Listening drives efficiency. That's definitely the headline, right? So it's brilliant. I mean, it's like I'm so pleased that you've taken kind of such leaps and bounds and are still around and haven't had to pivot and have had the success that you've had. But as you say, the companies we spoke nearly 5.5 years ago, but you've been around for 15 years. So what's next for the company? What's your vision for the next kind of 15 years? Where does Cogito go from here?
Yeah,
apart from world domination, obviously.
Well, I think I've evolved in my thinking, honestly. Like when I started, I would have said, and I maybe even did say, I can't remember when we spoke 5 years ago, but like, what we're going to do is we're going to get our technology, we're going to deploy it everywhere, we're going to help all the conversations in the world, we're going to, and I would have certainly, at one point I definitely thought that, right? And but I think that now that I'm a bit further on, I've come to more of the conclusion that companies should stay true to their original mission.
Mm-hmm.
And that the real benefit of longevity, the real benefit is excellence in your defined space. That's what you really get, right? Like, because you think that this is the thing I kind of sometimes I catch myself as like, so, the world is CX or the world is broad, right? There's so many things that people do that we have no part in, right? We do like this thing, we provide these kind of real-time closed-loop guidance systems that, for this particular objective of improving and supporting the front line, right? And so, but like just doing this, just guiding people in the moment while they're speaking, supporting those teams, generating human data, it's an incredibly deep field, right? It's incredibly deep. And so like, I feel like what Cogito needs to do is just stay focused, get better and better at supporting frontline wellbeing, get better at supporting their experience and not waver, because it's endless. Like that problem is endless, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I really, again, it's probably different than what I was said few years ago, but that's what I think is the answer now.
Well, I think that's kind of fair, and also I think the other thing we've seen over the course of the last kind of number of years actually, you always see. I think people possibly past it now because they know it's making the sort of predictions are bunk, where people talk about they're predicting the death of email or the death of phone calls and all these different sort of things. But what we've actually seen is how, despite the kind of the massive investment in self-service, which is, as you say, is kind of important because people want to self-serve when things are easy to do, simple, and it's appropriate kind of to do that. But when things get, I feel like, urgent or sensitive or complex or complicated or all these different sort of things, then live channels or semi-live channels have stayed resolutely important. And will continue to do so, but just because we're human beings. And sometimes we want that connection, kind of like crumbs. Can you ever imagine a time where somebody is going to put think about this, an emergency situation where you're calling like in the States, like a 911, or here in the UK, it's like a 999 call. And can you imagine that somebody's going to go, we're going to put a chatbot in to receive kind of 999 calls or 911 calls. It's like going, oh, the horror. The horror was like a Joseph Conrad novel. It'd be like The Darkness. It's like that's kind of crazy. I mean, it just wouldn't work because in times of need, what do? We reach out to people because we want kind of people. And the more that we can do to help those kind of people make those kind of conversations kind of work, I think is the better. So fair play to you for staying focused. That kind of quote from Star Wars, "Stay on target."
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I love what you're saying. I never, I mean, obviously, the proof is in the pudding, but I never believed the stories, even going back years, that it was something we all go to self-service, because you're making a fundamental statement about humans that we don't want to talk to each other anymore, which I just don't think is exactly the case, right? And like only a human will understand what it is to be a human, right? And so I think these things are just sort of almost like socially immutable for like some, very, very, very long period of time. So
excellent. So Josh, is there anything else that you want to kind of like add that we've missed out before I ask you some sort of general sort of like kind of questions just to get your view from the trenches, as it were?
No, not top of mind. No, please to go.
Awesome. Well, so what I wanted to do then is ask you to sort of zoom out a little bit, because we've gone through, we thought the pandemic was a challenge. Then we come out of the pandemic and then all of a sudden we think, it's going to be stable. And then the world throws up a whole bunch of stuff, more stuff. And I think what's interesting is that I've been asking people sort of what sort of things, the last few years have been, challenging. And so what sort of lessons have you learned over the last couple of years that will inform what you're going to do or how you're going to do things going forward?
So I think one of the real big ones that's emerged, and I think now emerged and been, I guess, reasonably well understood, is the criticality of the well-being of the agent, as well as the focus on the well-being of the customer. And it's not that these words weren't used in the past. Of course, they were used in the past, but now they're like really used with seriousness. And I think, and part of it is the pandemic shift, right? So high attrition rates, high burnout rates, but also high social isolation. Like contact centers used to be big team event things. They were great. There was parties, and there were there were lunches together, and there was, joint experiences. And that's just not the case in the same way. So you got this kind of socially intensive job that now has a lot more social isolation associated with it. And we're not going back, like the efficiencies and the, reducing commutes and stuff is like really valuable. But the question is, what do we do about it? So like Cogitos now has, and we're not the only person, but we now have much more of a dual focus on CX and EX now. Right. And trying to understand that, and the two are part of the same strategy. And I just think it's been better understood, and so that's a much kind of I think clearer. And I'm very encouraged because the time is right, and arguably it should have been done earlier.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I love that. Because as you rightly point out, many contact centers, many people in service support, regardless of the size of the team, have went remote. Some of them are still remote. Some of them are coming back into a hybrid sort of thing. But you're absolutely right. It's like I love the way that you phrase it, a socially intensive activity. But when you're working remotely, it can be fraught, or it has a lot of social isolation in it. And because I think about that and think about how many demanding calls somebody might kind of take, and how, if you're in a team or face-to-face environment, how your colleague next to you could probably go, put the hand on your shoulder and go, hey, why don't you take a break for 5 minutes? I got you. And you don't get that when you're working kind of remotely. And sometimes we need to figure that into our thinking. It's not just about kind of the outcomes in terms of the customer outcomes and productivity and efficiency outcomes. It's also, as you say, it's all about the well-being kind of outcomes. And the things are harder to gauge and harder to measure. And I think that's a really important kind of point. So thank you for raising that, because it's a thing that gets kind of missed, and more analytics and or monitoring kind of like solutions aren't necessarily the whole answer. Keystrokes and throughput and all these different things, that's not necessarily the answer. It's like it has to be. We have to think about this. We have to really think about the problem and understand the problem. If we're gonna get this combination kind of right. So thank you for that. So if I was to say to you, kind of wrapping it up a little bit, it's to say to you, kind of boil it all down, because I tend to wander about these kind of podcasts, have a bit of a rummage around. People have to pick out the needles in the haystack. But I'm going to ask you to kind of like to produce a needle in this haystack, Josh, and say, if I was to boil it all down and ask you, what would be your best advice to somebody listening in that wants to improve their customer and employee experience simultaneously, what would it be? I mean, apart from going and buying Cogito and having it installed across your kind of like your footprint. That sort of advertorial is not allowed, by the way. So what would be your best advice?
Well, and if I come back to some of the threads that we talked about, as again, that is not one, but I think distinguish between self-service and service. It's so simple, but I just think it's important to keep those clear in your mind. What are you providing at self-service? What are you providing at service? Don't confuse the two. Focus on CX and EX together, and that's like the thing to do today. And then, I just think as well, this is an exciting time in the industry. Like there is a incredible amount of innovation, and us, but certainly not just us. There's like tons of like really, really great stuff out there that's getting traction, proving at scale. So I think it's just a good time to be excited by it. Be excited by it, try it, test and learn, and don't hang back too much because these technologies and these options work now, right? They work at scale and they're proven, and they won't always work for you, or something might be wrong, but it's kind of like, it's almost like to say the water's good, hop on in. I think is probably the most important thing to say.
Awesome. So thank you. I mean, that's great. So a couple other questions before as we can wrap up. So these are the things. So these are ones I ask on the end of these kind of podcasts, kind of on a routine basis, and they're all. The first one's about kind of the punk sort of thing, which I explained to you before we kind of got started today. So my first question is, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, so to the extent that punk is a bit more brazen, but also back to basics. I mean, it's a human focused attitude. Like it's just come back to the humans, and don't get distracted. Right. I think that would be the pithy response, I think.
So what would be the takeaway from that? Don't get distracted, or stay focused, or
stay focused. You always have to come back. I think in the thick of KPIs and technologies and all this stuff, you just got to always come back to: is this good for the humans, that your employees and your customers? Like, are they going to be better? Is it going to be better for them to do this? And just kind of continuing going back. That's, for me, that's the back to basics of CX. Yeah. Is just come back to the humans every time. If you do that, I just don't think you can go wrong.
I am going to write human focused because I'm checking my list and I'm pretty sure it's not on there.
What?
Well, there's lots of other things that point in that direction, but this is the kind of like human focused.
Human focused. Okay.
So thank you for that. So the second one I was going to say is that the Punk XL book was a second album, as it were, stood on the shoulders of Punk CX, and it introduced this idea of experience leadership. So what company or brand do you think is an experienced leader, and why?
So let me offer two. So first, I guess, is the most well known, right, which is Apple. Right? So, and I think they're deservedly well known for incredible experience at scale, and that's only from the same thing: complete devotion to both employees and the consumer. Total, complete devotion and willingness to evaluate things themselves and do it their way based on first principles, right? So I think that they sort of stand high. The other one that I'd want to mention is Navy Federal Credit Union, who got the latest #1 ranking in the latest Forrester CX index. And they are an incredible example of focus on community. They serve a very specific community, and they do so at really very large scale. But the way they think about community and giving back to the community and having participants in the community on the service teams and that kind of incredible sort of mission-driven orientation, I think, is outstanding.
Awesome. Great. Kind of shout out to them. And then one final question before we can wrap up. And that's because, well, let's face it, most of us are doom scrolling every time we kind of wake up in the morning and get our first cup of coffee. And it's like, no. Oh, that's interesting. No, it's not. And then so I want to finish on a good news story or a positive note. So I've been asking people lately to tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week.
So I'm going to give a bit of a glass half full to a glass half empty, right? So okay. We have, obviously the news cycle and a lot of stuff around, tightening of the economy and all that sort of thing. But I'll tell you the positive side on that is I think we are having a much more transparent and mature conversation, at least in the business communities, about, look, business cycles tightening. It's okay. We're going to do our jobs. We're going to keep going, rather than a sort of a necessarily a doom and gloom and the Chicken Little type of a thing. I think so. There's an awareness that stuff is changing and stuff, but I think that it's not I don't see that as being, so at least in the business leaders, emotional. It's just like, yep, this is part of the cycle. We're going to do our jobs and keep moving. So I think it's a real positive. I think it's like a maturing, sort of moment. So awesome. I like that.
Well, thank you for the glass half full.
Yeah.
So can I just say, Josh, first of all, congratulations on your success for and longevity, and long may it continue. I am so pleased that you've been able to come back on the podcast and have made such kind of like big strides, and that it's almost like the market's come to you. And whilst the kind of the real time or near real time guidance market is not arrived, it's emerging sort of thing, but it's kind of like it's emerging fast as kind of things develop and interest develop and people realize the importance of it. But I just wanted to say thank you and congratulations on that. And just thank you for coming on the podcast again and sharing your time and your insights with us today. And that's been awesome.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Adrian. Thanks for the support over the years.
You're welcome. Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.